Greetings, trainers, and welcome to episode 3 of Soundproof here in the, 5th, 6th week of our operation here. My name is Brendan Lewis. I go by Mr. BDog46 on Twitter and other associated forums, and I am joined by Jake Muller, my good friend who goes by Major Bowman on the internet as well. And we are back here with episode 3. Jake, I'm pretty excited. It just keeps on rolling here.
Yeah, definitely. I don't really see a reason that we shouldn't keep going. The ball started rolling a few weeks ago.
Don't put that on me, jeez. You sound like I'm implicating both of us here.
Right.
We actually had a big fight this week where I was like, Jake, it has to stop. And Jake was like, no, Brendan, we have to go on.
He really tried to quit, and I said, Brendan, we signed a contract. We know we have 2 years of this.
We're making too much money to give up now.
There will be a big legal conundrum if either of us try to stop now, so we just got to keep pushing.
So anyway, welcome to episode 3. We're still stuck kind of in limbo here as far as live events go as we approach Worlds here. And of course, this is going to be the second to last episode before Worlds. So in 2 weeks, we will be covering Worlds a little bit more extensively. And of course, it is going to seep into a lot of the discussions that we have here this week. But as far as content for right now, for you, our listeners, we do have a couple of online tournaments that did occur over the past week or so. So there are actually some results other than just the Showdown ladder to talk about, which is pretty exciting. So we will go over, of course, the ladder. And then the Mount Silver circuit wrapped up, I believe, this past week and had a couple of pretty good players in it. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And, of course, the famous and latest Zelda challenge, which will be the money going towards the World Championship in this installment of it did occur. And those tournaments are always well attended, so we'll give some coverage on that as well.
Yep, and then after that, we will be joined by our good friend Thomas Valentine Cooleen, who you all know and love by now, purveyor of ducks and psychic types in the past few years. And so we're going to have him on to talk about how archetypes progress throughout formats. It's a topic that we're both pretty interested in. It's something we wanted to talk about because, a lot of people are known for certain archetypes throughout formats. Obviously, Tommy being the king of ducks in 2017 is a very good example. And so we're going to get to pick his brain about why he picks certain archetypes, how he adjusts them throughout formats, and why he chooses to stick with them as opposed to ditching them for something else.
All right, and I think that'll be pretty cool. He's somebody, I think I was talking to you about this the other day, Jake, and I had a very long discussion on the car ride back from Nationals, and Tommy was able to give like a very almost excessive level of detail into the building of Sunny D, which is, I guess infamous would be the correct word to use at this point,
probably
although
the best
that would
word.
be much to his dismay, format from 2016 World. So anyway, he's got a lot of cool thoughts as far as team construction, archetype development, and format values and stuff like that. So I think he'll have a lot of cool things to say to us.
Yeah.
But until then, we will jump into this episode's rendition of the ladder's greatest hits. And Jake, one of the first things I noticed is that we're starting to have less and less teams available as far as replays go, which is kind of to be expected given that we are in prime Worlds testing season and people are trying to keep stuff close to the vest.
Right. So last week we pulled the first 25 available teams from the ladder, and we got up to about number 50 on the ladder before we got to 25. And this week we also got to about 50 on the ladder before we got to 20 teams. We dropped it down to 20 just in the interest of time, but we still have about the same coverage on the ladder, and so you can tell there that's a 20% drop in the number of teams available. So people definitely trying to keep their techs hidden before Worlds, very understandably, as Worlds is the most important tournament of the year.
Unless you're trying to get on the snowball, in which case you could argue the Open is the most important tournament of the season. But anyway,
well, that's next season, Brendan. Let's get it straight.
You didn't specify which season. But of course, number 1 on our show and number 6 on the ladder this week is a team featuring Xerneas Lunala, Kangaskhan, Tapu Fini, Incineroar, and Crobat. So a pretty standard complementary 4 to go along with Xerneas Lunala here.
Yeah, somewhat unremarkable. This is a team you look at and say, oh yeah, I see what they're trying to do. It's just a Xerneas Lunala team. A little bit less offensive than like the Tapu Lele Lucario versions, but still very much intent on setting up that Xerneas and Lunala.
Mm-hmm. I think Crobat's kind of interesting here, as we're not going to spend too much time on every team. I had to stop myself there, Jake. I'm sorry, that wasn't an indictment of you. But Crobat, kind of like if you slap a mental herb on it and give it something like Quick Guard, is even kind of a nice answer to Tornadus, which is still kind of all over the place.
Yeah, definitely.
So kind of interesting in that guard. And at number 10 here is a team of Rayquaza, Kyogre, Tapu Fini, Incineroar, Nihilego, and Ferrothorn. So maybe not a 6 I've exactly seen, but not a 6 I'm shocked to see.
It's a 6 you've probably exactly seen if you replaced the Kyogre with the Xerneas. This team straight up looks like it's an X-ray team that someone just threw a whale on. I think it's actually just one mon off of Pato's team if you replace Ferrothorn as well. So.
Right. So a lot of common cores starting to show up here, regardless of restricted pairing, although I guess they do go with Rayquaza pretty well here.
Right.
The next team at number 13 here, a team of Xerneas, Kyogre, Kangaskhan, Incineroar, Tornadus, and Amoonguss. And this is kind of an interesting team to me, Jake, because I don't remember if it was our first or second week here, but we kind of talked about how maybe Tornadus was going to work its way onto Xerneas, Kyogre teams eventually. And with the Kangaskhan there and everything, this looks almost exactly like I would expect a Xerneas or a Kyogre version of a Kang-Torn team to look like.
Yeah, I think that was last time. It was during this segment where we found a couple teams with Zernoger and maybe one with Torn, but this is, I think, is a very well fleshed out version of Zernoger with the Tornadus, because I think it has everything you need to support both Xerneas and Kyogre, and Tornadus really does both of those well, I think.
Definitely. And at number 19 here is our first Lunala Rayquaza team of the week after it showed up strongly the previous episode. And it features Tapu Koko, Incineroar, Stakataka, and Amoonguss. So a pretty common, again, pretty common 4 supporters for that Rayquaza Lunala restricted combo.
It's another, like, if you replace Lunala with Kyogre, that would also be like a really strong Rayogre team.
Yeah,
so it's kind of interesting that a lot of these Rayquaza teams, the second restricted is pretty flexible. I think that just kind of speaks to Rayquaza's strengths because it just fits on so many different team compositions.
Yeah, it's an incredibly good Pokemon, and the fact that it's kind of a pairing like Rayquaza Lunala, you very rarely see those restricted pairs without Kyogre or Groudon in some capacity, right? And I think that's that kind of that bias that I just very clearly spelled out is almost gone as a result of Rayquaza being so good, is that it feels like a primal like it was in 2016 maybe isn't mandatory anymore.
Right. Yeah, moving down to the list, number 24 is our 5th team of the week, and it is a Necrozma Duskmane, Kyogre, Gyarados, Tapu Lele, Incineroar, and Amoonguss.
That's a cool team. I think that's really neat.
Yeah.
I think Gyarados is a Pokemon that a lot of people have. It even showed up way back in 2016 as like one of those weird meme X-ray partners. And it's something that people, like, in theory just works so well in restricted formats, but maybe just hasn't been able to get itself there just yet. But this is a pretty cool stab at it, I think.
No, I agree. I think it's kind of cool. I think this Necrozma could very well be Ultra. I think with Tapu Lele it would make a little bit more sense. I think there are some other Duskmane teams that scream Trick Room non-Ultra a little bit, but this one makes a little bit more sense with Gyarados, Tapu Lele being more a fast offensive Pokemon.
Agreed. And at number 25 here, Xerneas, Lunala, Lucario, Tapu Lele, Incineroar, Smeargle. And at number 26 here, Necrozma, Duskmane, Kyogre, Salamence, Tapu Koko, Tapu Fini, and Incineroar. So again, another Necrozma, Duskmane, but that one doesn't scream Ultra or Hyper Offense so much as the other one does.
Yeah, this one's a little bit more... It seems to be a little bit more slower, bulky Necrozma, I would guess, at this point. Just because it's not accompanied by the Lele. Ultra Necrozma without Lele is a little bit disappointing, but Tapu Fini is a very good partner for Necrozma Duskmane if it just stays in its Duskmane form.
Right. And I guess it's nice to even have the opportunity, just because there's not a ton of items, I guess, that Duskmane wants so much, as you may as well just throw the Ultra Necrozium on it, but it could feasibly be, I don't know, weakness policy or whatever the heck
I think Solgalliums are the reason to live in too, just for that burst damage on Xerneas.
Yeah, that's true. And at number 27 here on this week's ladder is Rayquaza, Kyogre, Incineroar, Mimikyu, Celesteela, and Togedemaru. And Rayogre teams, it's you kind of wonder where they're going right now. It seems like based on, at least on the ladder, that there hasn't really been a whole bunch of development in the archetype at this point.
I mean, we hit on this last week too. A lot of the Rayogre teams we're seeing are just kind of smashing together the Rayogre teams that develop at NAIC. Like you got the Mimikyu from like the John Evans and that crew's team, but you have the Celesteela from Wolf and Aaron's team. And then Togedemaru just kind of shows up because if you're desperate for a Coco answer, I guess that's what you go with.
There it is. It sure is one. And then the first of two back-to-back Rayquaza Solgaleo teams features Tapu Koko, Tapu Fini, Incineroar, and Mandibuzz alongside Rayquaza and Solgaleo.
Yeah, this is kind of a resurgence of that team that won Japanese Nationals. Like you just said, there's another team back-to-back that has that Gastrodon, which is the exact six.
The exact same team, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting archetype. I'm not convinced that it's any good. I'll be blunt.
Yeah, I mean, neither. I don't really get why it's coming back now, though, is the thing. Like, it won Japanese Nationals, sure. It didn't show up at all at NAIC, as we probably could have guessed before NAIC started. And then now we're seeing it again on the ladder? Kind of an interesting timeline.
Yeah, the combination of Solgaleo and like restricted Dragon type has sort of existed for the entire format, where it was like kind of smashed onto Zygarde teams, and like you saw it next to stuff like Zekrom, as a way of giving those restricted Dragon types a real the teams featuring the restricted Dragon types a real Xerneas matchup.
Right.
So you see the theory, but Rayquaza like does all right against Xerneas. Like there are plenty of ways that you can give it a Xerneas matchup, whether it be like an offensive item like Choice Band or even Assault Vest to let it sit there. So I guess Solgaleo maybe doesn't. I don't know. I don't see the need for it.
Yeah, I agree.
But it's cool. Solgaleo's cool. I like to watch Sunsteel Strike, so I can get behind it if it shows up on stream. Anyway, at number 33 is another Kyogre team that does feature Tapu Fini, Incineroar, Ferrothorn, and Togedemaru. Not much to see here. At 37, though, another XY team. I think this is the exact six that we saw on the ladder last week, Jake, that features that support, kind of scream Perish Trap 4 of Gengar, Tapu Fini, Incineroar, and Landorus Therian.
Yeah, I think this is just kind of a reskin of the Moon Series XY team that was running around. I think it cut Dallas and maybe one or two more regionals, but
you just get to smack Gengar on there now.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Gengar fits really well on a team like that. You have that Parachops, and like you said, the Landorus, Incineroar, Fini, Gengar is a really strong Parachops. But you also have Xerneas for Geomancies, Yveltal for doing some other things. I don't really understand XY as an archetype in general, because I don't really see what Xerneas and Yveltal do for each other. But I mean, if you're going to use XY, I think this is probably one of the stronger teams.
Yeah, I agree. I think, Xerneas and Yveltal are both good Pokemon, but again, the synergy doesn't necessarily jump out at you.
Yeah.
Although I guess, like we talked about a little bit last time, you can put that Gengar, Tapu Fini, and Incineroar, Landorus T core next to just about anything and like make it work. So you wonder about how effective the restricted pairing is, or if somebody just really likes that support core.
Yeah.
But at 38 is another Kyogre team featuring Gengar, Tapu Koko, Incineroar, and Whimsicott. So Whimsicott, of course, did show up on the Kyogre Discord Mark II, I guess would be it, but not alongside Gengar, and that's kind of a pretty traditionally fearsome pairing with that what is it? Whimgar. I was like Whimgar.
Gengar.
Gengar.
No, yeah. I mean, this kind of seems like, again, like Kyogre teams kind of combining the different techs people have come up with. The team that did really well in Madison was this 6 with Stakataka instead of Gengar, and that showed up at NAIC again. I believe it debuted twice with Caleb and Diana.
Right.
But then they decided to put the Gengar over Stakataka, which was used on Wolf and Aaron's team. And so I think Kyogre teams are all like very similar to each other at their different stages. And I think if everyone using Kyogre combined forces, they would come up with like one ultra team that would never need to change.
I mean, unless they just played mirrors at every big event.
Well, yeah, I mean.
You played a speed set. It has to be Shadow Ball Gengar.
Oh my God, yeah.
At number 39 on the ladder this week, Xerneas, Lunala, Lucario, Tapu Lele, Incineroar, and Amoonguss. At number 40 on the ladder this week is Rayquaza, Kyogre, Tapu Fini, Incineroar, Bronzong, and Togekiss. So kind of I guess Togekiss being really the first kind of breaking away from the Kyogre formula, I guess, so to say. I didn't really get that out so well.
Yeah, I think Kyogre enjoys Togekiss just because redirection is good with anything, and if you give your Rayquaza free turns on a team with redirection, you might think it could be Swords Dance Rayquaza, and not that that's a necessity at all. But again, Togekiss this team has approximately 0 Tapu Koko answers, and so I feel like something like a Moongus might be generally better on Ryogre just because you actually have like a built-in Koko check, and it gives you another Xerneas check as well. Whereas Togekiss can like Tailwind if it doesn't take an electric type move. It doesn't really help you against Xerneas at all unless you can like cheese it with Encore on the turn at Geomancies or something. So
Right.
yeah, kind of. I generally I think Amogus is a little bit better in that slot for Ryogre.
I think I would agree. But again, I don't know. Togekiss is one of those things, again, just kind of like I was talking about with, what was the other one? I was talking about how it's always, Gyarados, where it's kind of like better in theory than it is in like actual practice. Because, I mean, from a little bit of experience using Togekiss, it's always just kind of like in a restricted format, it doesn't have the stats to sit there and redirect more than once or twice.
Yeah, definitely.
So down to 41 is another Ryogre that features Scissor, and that is presumably Mega Scissor with Tapu Koko, Tornadus, and Togedemaru. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean it's another like double steel Ryogre, although the two steals are some of the worst two you could probably put in those two slots.
I think Togedemaru's fine.
I mean Togedemaru is barely a steel type.
That's true. It's about as much a steel type as Kartana is.
I was about to say that.
Maybe
yeah.
a little
bit more of a steel type than Kartana, but barely.
Right. At number 46 is, I think, the first Xerneas Groudon that's shown up. And that's not to say that there aren't plenty of them in, some of the teams that we missed. But this one being Xerneas, Groudon, Gengar, Incineroar, Landorus, Therian, and a Moongus. So somebody take that core that we were just talking about with the Gengar, Incineroar, Landorus, T, Finny, and just swapped in a Moongus.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the exact six that like Case and crew were using, but with an Amoonguss over the Feeny. I think that's a fine switch. It gives you a little bit better flexibility with the Xerneas mode. The Feeny wasn't really a big, important part of the Perish mode, in my opinion, and so I don't think that's a big loss for that squad. You still have the 2 Intimidates and 2 U-turns, and like obviously the Gengar too.
Right, and it even enables like wanting to go to the Xerneas mode as well.
Right.
Which is something that I know that those teams like to do because I lose to it every time. It's I always like play the Perish mode well, and then just like game 2, oh, there's Xerneas on the field. Okay, anyway, another Xerneas Groudon team at 47, which does also feature Gengar and Incineroar alongside Togekiss and Gastrodon.
So this one I think is a better option a better team for Togekiss, just because you have much better answers to Koko. Like obviously on a Ryogre team, when you're already weak to Koko, Togekiss just compounds that. But with Zerdon, as soon as Xerneas Geomancies, Koko is irrelevant. Groudon is one of the hardest stops to Koko, and so is Gastrodon. Gengar can Sledge Bomb it if it wins a speed tie, and so this team isn't super worried about Koko, and I think Togekiss makes more sense here.
Right. I think Groudon is as good as it gets for a Koko check there.
Yeah.
So down to 48 is a Ryogre team that features Tapu Koko, Incineroar, Tornadus, and Ferrothorn, another one that doesn't really surprise me at all.
Yeah. There's not really a whole lot to say. It's just kind of the next iteration of Tornadus. It's kind of branching out to more archetypes now, which is kind of cool. But, I mean, anything with Kyogre and Tornadus, you would not really be surprised about.
Right, I think I agree. Although, Tornadus breaking away from Kangaskhan is kind of an interesting development, I think.
True. Mm-hmm.
And the last team on our list this week, which just come in at number 49, is a Rayquaza and Zygarde team that features Tapu Fini, Incineroar, Mimikyu, and Mandibuzz. So the first thing that I was thinking when I looked at this team is, where exactly is the Misty Seed? Did you take it away from Zygarde, or is Mandibuzz running like a berry or something?
Oh, that's a good point. My first thought was, I wonder if that's Psych Up Mimikyu.
Oh my god.
I don't think I've seen Zygarde used on a serious team since the Moon series. It's been a long time.
I think at the beginning of the format, people were trying to do the same thing with the Solgaleo stuff, but I don't like that. How does that team beat Xerneas?
I don't think
doesn't.
It does.
It just does.
Full stop.
It's Aura Break
no
Zygarde. Aura Break Zygarde and AV Rayquaza. You just
that actually. I wonder if it is Aura Break, because I don't think there's no way you beat Xerneas otherwise.
No, I don't think you can.
That's like 100% Haze Feeny.
It has to be, right?
Yeah, you would think so.
And Faria Mimikyu and
yeah,
I don't know.
Yep.
Roar Incineroar and Snarl Mandibuzz. It just has to be. Any Xerneas tech is there right now.
Yeah.
So anyway, that wraps up the ladder for this week. A lot of Ryogre, I think, is what I continue to take away from most of these ladder sessions that we're looking at, Jake. But we
Right.
also spoke about how it doesn't really seem too much like, at least on the ladder, things are developing in an unexpected direction. Of course, Celesteela and Mimikyu kind of came out of nowhere at NAIC, and now there's not really anything that's really jumping out at me here. So,
Yep.
of course, teams are hidden, and we're still a couple weeks away from Worlds, so you never know what's going to happen between then and now. And I think now we're going to jump towards the results of the Mount Silver Circuit final, and I believe we have a top 8 teams from
Yes.
that format, so we'll run through those real quick, and of course we'll also put a link to these teams up in the description
Of course.
on all forums. So this team, starting from 1, and I'll just kind of read through them. The first place team was Calvonix running a team, and we talked about this one a little bit already, Jake.
Yeah.
With the Xerneas Kyogre, and then Kangaskhan Tornadus, and then Incineroar and Amoonguss. So I think that's a really important team to talk about. We'll come back to that in just a minute after I finish reading these guys off here. At number 2 was Animus with a team of Rayquaza, Kyogre, Metagross, Tapu Koko, that thing is called Incineroar, and Mimikyu, so that's a team that we've seen quite a bit of already. At number 3, or the first of the top 4 teams, was Swaggy McBuckets, which team of Groudon, Xerneas, Lopunny, Tapu Koko, Incineroar, and Jumpluff. And the other top 4 team, piloted by Lightcore, is Standard Kangtorn with an Amoonguss in the final spot instead of Mawile next to that Como of course. At number 5, the first of the top 8 teams, is a Lunala Kyogre team that also has that Lopunny, and is also accompanied by Tapu Koko, Crobat, and Celesteela. At number 6, or the second of the top 8 teams, is apparently an Ultra Necrozma team that does have a Dawnwings Lunala, or a Dawnwings Necrozma with Groudon, Kangaskhan, Tapu Koko. That's a Stakataka and Amoonguss. Xerneas Lunala, piloted by Jono TV at 7, featuring a Kangaskhan, Tapu Koko, Incineroar, and Nihilego. And then finally is Joe UX9, featuring the team that he knocked me out of the North America International Championships with. So some interesting stuff there, Jake, and I'd sort of highlighted what exactly I wanted to talk about briefly, but that team at number 1, piloted by Calvonix, is like what I would call the spiritual successor to the team that Lightcore was running, featuring the Como and Groudon Xerneas.
I fully agree. I think King Torn, we trash talked it a lot. I think mainly just because we really hated the last 2 months that usually came on that team.
Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah, like obviously Xerneas and Groudon are good Pokemon. Kang's a good Pokemon. Torn, it's had better days, but it does the job it needs to on this team. And I think just the fact that like the last 2 slots were usually occupied by Como, Mawile, I can't get behind that. But I think this team is much more sound. I really like the look of it. I'm a big fan of Zernover in general. I just have a lot of fun playing it now and 3 years ago. And so if I can find a good Zernover team and it looks good to me, I'm going to rave about it. And this is definitely one of those teams.
I think I agree with most of your takes there, Jake. And the thing that I kind of think about looking at this version of it as opposed to the one with Como is it gives you like the opportunity to play Pokemon.
Right.
You know, like Incineroar and Amoonguss are 2 of those Pokemon that give you the opportunity to make a lot of safe switches, safe pivots. Like you can switch those 2 into like a big chunk of the heavy hitters in the format, and it's not so much reliant on like trying to flowchart. And I think that the Groudon Xerneas team with the Como, of course, is like very, very flowchart heavy.
Yeah.
And if you're not leading Kangaskhan Tornadus, like what exactly are you doing with that team, I guess?
Right.
Is like, and this team with like Incineroar gives you a much stronger Xerneas mode in that if you're able to get that Geomancy up, that it's a little easier to enable Xerneas to sweep as opposed to trying to just get as much momentum as you can with Tornadus and then click Moonblast twice with Xerneas maybe.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think on the classic King Torn team, if you're not bringing King Torn, you're losing.
Yeah.
You're not just you're not using some other game plan. You're just probably straight up losing just because those 2 were kind of the crux of that team. But
Right.
with this Xernoga team, you
you're-
can very realistically bring Xerneas, Kyogre, Incineroar, Amoonguss, and those
Right.
4 can win you games pretty simply.
Definitely. I think at the very least with the old one, if you're not leaning Kangtorn on turn 1, like turn 1 game 1, maybe you try to switch it up for game 2. But
Right.
anyway, some other takeaways after we've raved about this team. I think we'll both be taking that onto the ladder and over the next couple weeks is there's a couple of Lopunny starting to show up, and
Mm-hmm.
I think we talked a little bit about it last night, Jake, while we were going over this week. It's a Pokemon that you're a fan of, and one that I maybe am not so much.
I don't know if I'm like a straight up fan, but I definitely see its uses. It's a very fast fake out, which is always good. If you're basically using it in a slot where you would otherwise have Kang, is kind of how I look at it. Like if you don't want the specific things Lopunny offers, Kang's probably a better option there. But Lopunny does have a lot of cool support moves. It gets after you on core fake tiers, and so I think a lot of these teams are going to make use of that. Like specifically to thy Force team in top 8. It's next to Lunala and Kyogre, which are both two very strong special attackers. Coco as well. So I would be very surprised if that Lopunny didn't have fake tiers. Whereas on Swaggy McBucket's team, I hate saying that out loud. I wouldn't be surprised if that was more of an encore team.
Yeah.
Potentially it could be special Groudon with fake tiers, Lopunny as well. And so I think you have to respect a lot of different options when you see a Lopunny team preview. And I think the fighting type is really good too. Both of these, well, no, only one of them's with Xerneas. I think, especially with Xerneas, the option to knock out something like Stag Attacker or Ferrothorn is pretty huge.
Yeah. I think the one thing, and I totally respect all of its options, and I think Lopunny is one of those Pokemon that you see in team preview, and you're like, oh god, here we go.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially in the hands of Chef has been using it with that Shedinja team. I don't think you could ever see something that's more terrifying than seeing Shedinja Lopunny at team preview. But anyway, the point being that it's one of those Pokemon that if you're able to figure out what it does, what it's going to do on turn 2 before it does it, that the whole team will fold. Like if you catch a fake tiers plus attack with a defensive switch and they're not able to pick up a knockout, the whole team's going to fold. It's a very momentum based Pokemon. So let's see, anything else? Oh, and then there was that one Dawnwings Necrozma that did show up, which is kind of interesting. Those teams that's an unsolved archetype, I think. It seems like there's a lot of things that people are working on with
that
with
team
Necrozma
looks
there.
Kind of strange to me because I think if the Coco was a Lele, it would make a lot more sense.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why you would run Dawnwings without it being Ultra. And so I think it's probably safer to assume that's still Ultra, even though there's no Lele.
Right.
But I don't know,
I think we saw there was a Ghost or a Lunalium one that ended up cutting, or it got second at Japan Nats, I think, right?
Oh,
and
maybe,
it
yeah.
set Trick Room and stuff like that. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's fair.
Kind of an interesting Pokemon.
Yeah, I don't Dawnwings is easily the less popular of the two. If you're not using Ultra, and so I think the fact that it is Dawnwings might give away that it's Ultra because Moongeist Speed is very good on Ultra. But I don't know, it's interesting. We don't really know much about these teams other than the 6 Pokemon that they used, obviously, and so it would be cool to know if that was in fact Ultra or was something like Lunalium, like Trick Room instead.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting Pokemon though. So thank you to the Mount Silver team, and I don't know exactly who the entire crew is, but we got this information from our buddy Big Slim, so thank you to them, and of course thank you to everybody who hosts those grassroots tournaments, especially during downtime during the season. It's always nice to have content and stuff going on to really, I think stuff like this really drives meta development in downtimes during the year, so it's really important. And on that note, as far as things that drive meta development, we are going to jump right over into the results of the Zelda challenge here, which are some of the most important and influential online tournaments that do take place. Of course, they've kind of been going on for a couple years now and provide huge prize pools to in a winner-take-all format, basically to send one individual to the upcoming international championship, which is really cool. And he's managed to keep them going for quite a while.
Yeah, I think ever since the demise of the Nugget Bridge Major, the Zelda challenges have been the most important and watched and influential online tournaments we've had. Sam does a pretty good job running these. There have been some hiccups in the past, but I think we're mostly past that, and a lot of people participate in these, and a lot of people win some pretty good money from these, and a lot of people use some pretty good teams in these, and so really cool to see what people have come up with for this one, because there are a lot of teams that aren't just cookie cutter teams you might have stolen from an EIC. I think a lot of people did actually put time into teams for this tournament.
All right, and then on the other side, there are a lot of cookie cutter
Yeah.
teams that were stolen from NAIC. And on that note, we're going to go through and highlight some of the teams that did place well. And of course, the winner of this tournament was Arash Ahmadi, who is one of the best players of all time, of course. And he did pilot what was run by his countryman Pado to take top 8 in NAIC, which was that standard King Torn with Como and Incineroar in the last slot. And you know that if it hadn't won the tournament, we wouldn't be talking about it here on this podcast. But now that we have mentioned it, as much as we trash talk it, it is an undeniably strong composition, especially in strong hands.
I think once this team starts to fall out of favor, we're just going to have to dedicate like a minute every episode to like trashing King Torn. Because we've done it every episode so far, and I'm not really sure how to function without it at this point.
We'll make it like a segment that we have every
week. Yeah, it's just the very end. And here's our minute of hating on King Torn.
But at number 2, a very interesting team, which I think was one of the ones that Jake was alluding to there, as far as people that are building pretty creatively for some of the bigger tournaments coming up here. And this team was Necrozma, Duskmane, Kyogre, Lopunny, Tapu Lele, Mandibuzz, and Araquanid. So kind of a really interesting combination of Pokemon. And you can kind of see where there are like, 2s and 3s of Pokemon that combine well. But it's definitely like an interesting 6 to stand back and look at. Yeah,
there are definitely some combos. Like you see the Necrozma Lele, and you think, well, maybe that's Ultra Necrozma just because, Light that Burns the Sky in terrain's super strong. You see the Lele Mandibuzz, that could be, it's very likely Psychic Seed Mandibuzz just because that's such a good item on Mandibuzz.
You would
it's
think,
so bulky.
Yeah.
And you see like the Lopunny, and I don't know. Lopunny doesn't really combine with anything, but
Lopunny Lele, like you have fake out Tailwind stuff.
Right, and that could be another like fake
spout,
tier situation
right,
with Lele too. So
definitely,
I think the Araquanid is the big question mark on this team though. I literally haven't seen an Araquanid since like Tommy was joking about using it at the very beginning of Moon Series or something like that.
Oh yeah, and he kept sending those calcs. That was really annoying.
Yeah,
like, Tommy, shut up.
I mean, it has some really scary calcs. Like
it does. Yeah,
Hydro Vortex in Rain is stupid, but
it does a lot of damage.
There are a lot of things that also do a lot of damage to Araquanid, and so.
That's
the Araquanid makes me believe it might be Trick Room Necrozma, but
that was going to be my thought as well, because Tapu Lele, or not Tapu Lele, Lopunny also gives you like after you Trick Room stuff, so that you can guarantee, and then like sack Lopunny into Araquanid, and with Kyogre in the back, that sounds actually really tough to try and stop. But it's definitely an interesting team. It's just probably not something you'll see a whole lot like going forward, but it's cool to look at. I think it's neat.
Yeah.
Props to the player Average Pikachu for putting that together.
I think my favorite thing to come out of this tournament is that not only did people steal teams from this format, but they stole teams from 2016. Just straight up. I wouldn't be surprised if this was literally just Big Six with no edits, because that would just be so funny. I could see I could see myself like entering an Ultra Series tournament with Big Six just for fun. They're like accidentally winning it, and
then you just smack a Z move onto Talonflame.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder if and the player piloting Big Six, which was the number 3 team or the first of top 4, Radium, who is a very well known player and a very good player. You wonder if this isn't just somebody that was like memeing by taking Big Six into a tournament and just like really driving home a point here.
Well, it's like bringing like fake PG to like Showdown Room tournaments and then winning with them, because I know that a lot of people have like done that and actually won, especially Soak PG, that version. So this could just be something Radium did for fun and then happened to top 4 with it, which I want to believe that's the case, because that's way more funny than someone actually saying, I think Big Six is the call here.
I mean, it kind of makes a little bit of sense in that we're now in a priority Tailwind meta thanks to Kang Torn, and Talonflame is one of the Pokemon that does that, so it's something to think about there. But anyway, going the last team in top 4 and 2 of the other teams in top 8 are X-Ray, and 3 different X-Ray comps. So I think that after this archetype basically fell from grace at NAIC, it is kind of back here in numbers in this Zelda challenge.
Yeah, there is the standard X-Ray that won EUIC. It's like the X-Ray Feeny, Nihilego, and Amoonguss. That is one of the teams in top 8. But the last team in top 4 just have Lele Feeny, which is kind of interesting. And the team right below it is Tapu Koko instead. So we have 3 teams and 3 different Island Guardians too.
Hmm. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting team in that I thought a lot of people felt like, oh, this Pato version, he just like looked so dominant with it running through EUIC that there was maybe a sense at the time that maybe this was all of a sudden a solved archetype, and I don't think that ever was the case.
Right. No, I agree.
And I remember like a lot of people saying that like, oh yeah, this is best X-ray, like this is what it is, and Nihiligo, that is Pato's team there in top 8,
Yep.
but I think Gengar obviously has merits. Lele is a really good Pokemon that supports Xerneas well and is like, a strong offensive pairing with that Rayquaza. So I think there's still a lot to do with X-Ray here. And outside of Tapu Fini, we haven't even seen X-Ray with meme water types yet.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, Tapu Fini just kind of eliminates the need for like a weird water type, just because it's so good.
Right. Yeah,
like,
it
it
is.
fills the water type role in X-Ray very well while doing so many other things at the same time.
But I think like in a team composition where maybe you're not as bold as this guy in top 4, and you don't necessarily want to like triple stack fairy types. You might
Right.
look elsewhere for a water type if you're really attached to Tapu Lele.
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah, it's an interesting archetype that I don't hate as much as I did in 2016, which is nice. And then rounding out top 8 here, there is a Lunala Rayquaza team featuring Tapu Koko, Nihiligo, Incineroar, and Amoonguss. Those teams are kind of cool. And we did kind of, I don't want to say we predicted that we called that Lunala Rayquaza was on its way up, but we did talk quite extensively about it during our review of the ladder last episode.
It popped up so much on the ladder last episode, and like out of nowhere, really. I had only seen it once before, like in the entirety of Ultra Series, and that was at NAIC, one of the rounds I played against it. And I mean, it just kind of surprised everyone. I think a lot of people were like making comments about all the like Lunala's Ray on the ladder, and it made top 8 in this tournament too. So clearly something to be considered if you're looking into Worlds or possibly the Open or whatever else you might be playing in Ultra Series.
Definitely, and I think it makes a lot of sense, in theory at least, is that in kind of the same sense that, back in 2016, people were like, oh, Groudon and Rayquaza, its highest base stat total. Like, in isolation, these two Pokemon are both incredibly good.
Yeah.
Lunala with its Z move is very strong. Rayquaza is arguably the best Pokemon in the format right now, so, they're not opening too many glaring weaknesses outside of Yveltal, so it makes sense that you could put these two Pokemon together, and while there's not necessarily as much innate synergy between them, that they're both good enough on their own to kind of like create a team archetype.
Right. Final team in
and
top 8 is another
You got
version
it.
of Zernogre. I believe it's the same 6 as the team that won the Mount Silver finals, but it's just a Gengar over the
Gengar over
Kangaskhan.
Kang. Yeah.
Which I think
Which
is
is
interesting.
interesting.
I think Kang does a
Yeah.
lot for this composition, but you still have Incineroar for Fake Out, and so it's not like you
Mhm.
lose everything that you might want from Kang. Gengar
Right.
just kind of supports everything in a different way. And Gengar Kyogre is really strong against Groudon if you can just trap the Groudon in the rain. So I
Mhm.
understand why the Gengar would make an appearance here as well.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool composition. That's definitely an archetype I'm going to take a peek at, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
And yeah, we've talked a little bit about it. We'll probably be pursuing that. But going into top 16 here, we'll just kind of hit on some of the highlights. There is another X-Ray here as the first team in top 16 that does feature a Salazzle. Unfortunately, we're able to report that it's not Jamie Boyd because it also has an Incineroar on the team, and we
to
know
be fair, if Jamie was ever to use Incineroar, I think there would also be a Salazzle, so I don't think this completely disqualifies him. But I think it is very likely not Jamie, because
right.
I think Jamie using Incineroar would just be a cry for help.
We'd need to do a check-in on him, a wellness check. The next team in top 16 is the 6 that Tommy popularized, so we'll get to talk quite a bit about that archetype coming up in just a couple minutes, so we'll omit it for now. Another team in top 16, pretty interesting here, featuring Ho-Oh, Groudon, Gengar, Persian, Incineroar, and Amoonguss.
I mean
that sure do be a team.
it is. I'm playing a game of like count the ogre checks, and I see like half of one in Amoonguss. So I'm not really entirely sure how this team beats ogre, other than like desperately trying to trap it on the field with Groudon, which I
Right.
guess works. You have 2 U-turns, well, like
Parting
a U-turn and
shot,
a parting
U-turn,
shot.
yeah. Right.
So not impossible, but like an ogre and Tailwind.
Yeah, I mean, an ogre with a Rayquaza in the back.
That too. Yeah.
Especially because Ho-Oh doesn't really do so hot itself against Rayquaza. It kind of folds to those strong physical moves. So
Yeah.
anyway, maybe it's one of those teams that kind of like capitalized on a tournament field that lent itself to that sort of thing.
That's fair,
Kind of
yeah.
like what was it? Was it Korean Nationals where there was like a Zekrom in top 4 and Ray Ogre was all over top cut or
That
something like
sounds
that?
familiar, yeah.
Anyway, going on through top 16, there is another X-Ray here featuring Kartana, which, not too far out of left field.
Mm-hmm.
A Ray Ogre team featuring Mimikyu, Gothitelle, Incineroar, and Amoonguss.
I don't know why people think Gothitel's a Pokemon in this.
It's
format.
every year.
know.
Every year.
Well, no, I think it's a
in-
good Pokemon in general, but like,
Right, I think in non-restricted formats, it's a good
yeah,
Pokemon.
yeah, it's like,
And it's one of those things that always, it always is like non-existent at the beginning of the format, and then right around Worlds, people are like, wait, Shadow Tag's super busted.
Yeah.
Like, why don't we pick Gothitelle up? That said, Gothitelle just doesn't have the stats to stand up in this
no,
format. and I
it
feel like
barely has the stats to work in like.
And now that Incineroar exists too, like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And then the next team in top 16 is Jackson, who's running Lunadon still. So that seems to be the team that he's latched onto, featuring Salamence, Metagross, Tapu Koko, and Incineroar. That was also the team that I think that he snuck onto ladder with last week. So we've talked about that enough. The final, second to last team in top 16 was Serapis, piloting that standard Xerneas Groudon 6 with Salamence, Tapu Fini, Incineroar, and Amoonguss. So that is, pretty cut and dry at this point. Everybody knows what it does.
Yep.
And it's still, one of those strong teams that if you put it in good hands, it's going to make a run. And the last team of top 16 is a Ray Ogre team featuring Tapu Fini, Togedemaru, Incineroar, and Ferrothorn. So not a whole lot to write home about there either.
Yeah. There are a few more teams that snuck into top cut. I believe they did an X2 cut, so there are 5 more that made top cut and then eventually lost in the first round for the top 16 play-in. But we do have an X-Ray with Koko, Celesteela, Incineroar, and Amoonguss, which very much reminds me of the Wolf and Aaron team, but with a Xerneas instead of the Ogre. Then we have
they did say that Celesteela was their second restricted.
exactly, yeah. So the Xerneas is just a bonus at that point.
So.
But a really interesting team after that. We have Ray Ogre, but with a Latias, Nihilego, Staraptor, and Celesteela. And the Latias and Staraptor are not Pokemon I've seen in quite a long time now.
And I feel like it's probably for a good reason,
Yeah.
too. I mean, Staraptor always has a niche. Maybe
Yeah, I
it
mean, you have
doesn't
like
it
Choice
in-
Scarf, Final Gambit with Intimidate.
Right, that's kind of what it does, but that does lose a bit of its influence in restricted formats because all these things just have giant HP
Yeah.
stats. So, I don't know. That sure do be a Staraptor. And the next team is that Kokochu pairing that Mogar has become famous for using here alongside Ray Ogre, Incineroar, and a Mega Scissor.
Right. Moving on down, we've got 2 more Zerndon teams to round out top cut. One of them with the Salamence, Koko, Incineroar, and Jumpluff that's kind of been making a comeback. It's like the third we've seen in the last couple episodes.
A quote-unquote comeback.
Yeah. The comeback from the one time it was ever used.
Right.
And then finally, Velocity running a Metagross, Kangaskhan, Koko, and Tornadus with Zerndon.
So I guess that's one of those... is that the 6 that Ashton used at NAIC?
I think you're right, yeah.
Yeah. So a much more palatable version of Kangtorn as
Yeah.
far as I'm concerned, in the sense that there's no meme dragon type
Right.
or a Mawile. But anyway, that does round out the Zelda challenge, which of course Arash did end up winning. So congratulations, he's going to get thrown a lot of money to go to Washington D.C. this year if that is what he chooses to do. And of course he's won a world championship and also top cut another. So
Yeah.
a scary individual to have at that tournament.
Yep. Thank you to the Mount Silver Discord for tweeting these out, and to Twitter user Giovanni VGC for collecting all the teams. We will have everything linked in the description as always.
Right, so that is going to wrap up our competitive results coverage for this week. We still do have a lot more competitive Pokemon discussion coming up in just a couple minutes, so we're going to take the briefest of breaks while we go get Tommy up from the nap that he's inevitably taking right now, and then we will be back, so stay tuned for continued coverage of Tommy. Welcome back to Tommy Watch 2019. We do have him here with us for the second portion of our podcast here today. My name's Brendan Lewis. I'm joined by Jake Moeller and now by Tommy Cooleen, who's here to talk with us about Archetype development this week. Tommy, welcome to the show.
I thought I was talking about watches.
I hate that. You could go now. Just
Oh,
hang
please,
up.
Tommy Watch. You have no room to speak here.
So, of course, Tommy is, regrettably, an individual that is well known to the community at large. And, Jake, I think you've been doing our character introductions here. Why don't you take us through it?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really think of anyone less deserving of, a position of community figurehead-esque nature, but I guess he's there for some reason. Maybe he's won a regional this year. Maybe he top 8'd 3 internets in a row back in 2017. Maybe he's just a really cool person that everyone likes for whatever reason. I don't buy it personally. Brandon, your name's
Whoa.
Brandon now.
No,
Yikes.
that's
No,
not
it's
okay.
not. Anyway, Brendan had to fight really hard for me to agree to ask Tommy, and he caved. And you can send me the $50 on Venmo later.
All right, sure. I think Tommy's best known for creating Sunny D.
Yeah.
For better and for worse.
So Tommy, well, we wanted to talk a little bit about this week as we are kind of covering a pretty wide range of topics here as we progress through the March to Worlds here is sort of the development of an archetype, and we've kind of tabbed you for this discussion because over the course of I think what I would argue are your two most successful seasons, being 2017 and now this season, you've kind of stuck with that one archetype and kind of dragged it through an entire format. So we wanted to kind of talk to you a little bit about, why you choose these things and what are your sort of values as you choose and then, stick with an archetype through an entire format. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think something that's really weird is you bring that up that it's, in my two most successful seasons, I did use one team and mostly stuck with them throughout the entire year. Mm-hmm. But in pretty much every other season, I've been a player that kind of goes back and forth and plays a bunch of different archetypes. So I think it's really interesting when you kind of get into that groove and find a team and can actually see through that entire process. Mm-hmm. From going from the other style of play where you just kind of playing whatever team happens to be hot at the moment.
Mm-hmm. One thing that always stuck out to me in 2017 was that even though you were not winning, but you were doing so well at all these internets with Ducks, and you kept building other stuff throughout the entire year. I know that Drew won 2 regionals with your teams, and they were both very much not Ducks, and so you still didn't lose the ability to play all this other stuff, but when it came down to it, you decided to go back to the tried and true, and it obviously worked for you in 2017.
Yeah, I think a big part of that was at some point I kind of just decided that this Ducks team was the team that, if not the best team in the format, it was the team that I was going to be able to play the best in the format, and more than anything, I thought it had the most matchups across the field no matter how I can play, because I think something that's really important is when you go into different formats, whether you're playing a regional format like 2017 or a restricted format like 2019, there are still varying levels of matchups within each particular format. You might not have the big restricted pairing archetypes of 2019 and something a lot more fluid like 2017, but there's still a lot of matchups across the board that you need to make sure I can beat Mimulax, I can beat all of the very common Coco, Arcanine, Tapu Fini stuff, and just making sure that you can have good matchups across the board with the team that you're playing, and I think that was a really important thing with both of the teams that I ended up doing pretty well with.
So when you are, building or selecting a team that you are, thinking about build or putting together or taking to an event, does the reason that you select these teams boil down to just matchups across the board based on where we are in the metagame, or is there something a little bit maybe less tangible as far as values in selection or team building?
I think everybody likes to play the game a very particular kind of way. Mm-hmm. I know that while I do play some like these like weird like hard setup based teams with a lot of like moving pieces, a lot of the teams that I generally tend to play move towards like these kind of hyper offense styles of play. I think that both, the Ducks team and the Ultra Necrozma team this year would both kind of fall under that that kind of archetype structure of like hyper offense. And because of that, I think when you get down to choosing a team, it's a mix of how you want to play the game, what are the matchups across the board, and generally just how you feel that you can play the team versus how other people are going to play the other popular teams in the format.
So in that sense, where you kind of mentioned that that a lot of, especially these two team choices that tend to be like Ducks and Spam, of course, what we're talking about here, are teams that are a little bit more hyper offensive. Do you think that? I guess my question would be, how much of that do you think is personal team preference versus you choosing something that's like objectively good?
I think that there is a philosophy behind hyper offense that I particularly find very strong, in that if you're able to take priority, take initiative against opposing teams, you're able to control more of the game than your opponent does. So when I find a team that I think has the matchups and has the ability to kind of take that initiative, I tend to lean pretty hard into them. I think that both of these teams did a really, really good job at doing that, and just being able to control more of the game than my opponent can, because I'm moving first, I'm hitting harder, I have more options than you do. Your options are kind of constrained to a certain amount of choices to maybe play around a Necrozma in terrain, or play around a Hydro Vortex on turn 1, stuff like that.
I also think there's kind of a bit of a false dichotomy between like a quote-unquote objectively good team and like a team that you're going to play well, because I think when you're going into, or rather when you're picking a team for whatever scenario, like whether it's like laddering or going to a Premier Challenge or NAIC or Worlds or whatever, you're going to be picking a team based on how you think you'll do with that team at that tournament. So I think if there is a team that you can say, I know I will perform the best with this team out of anything else, even if it's not like the best team on paper, I think that's an objectively good choice. And so I think that even if there might be like a team that looks really pretty when you look at it at team preview, and it might be referred to as like an objectively good team by a lot of people, if you're not good at playing it, or if you just don't know how it works, and there's this other team that might look janky but is your best option, I think that's your good choice. So it's like this weird distinction that people try to make sometimes, like, well, that team isn't good. Like I know I'm guilty of it. I probably said something like that in this podcast even, but like anytime that I say a team isn't good, I more mean like, oh, I probably couldn't use that myself, or like I don't understand how that team works.
I think a really good example of that is actually in 2018. There was the very standard Metagross team that players like Yuri and Justin Burns have been playing for most of the year and had like great success with. And there was just a point in that format where haven't been playing most of the year. I going into NAIC, and I just want to have a good tournament. If I can cut, that's great. Ideally, just make day 2, see where I can go from there. And I was looking at that tournament, and it's like, I know I could probably play Metagross stuff, and I think that's a very good team with a lot of really good matchups across the board. I think the only matchup I would have been scared of playing Metagross stuff back then probably would have been Charizard stuff. And, a lot of the Metagross players would tell you roughly the same thing, just hope that the Charizard players kind of burn themselves out. But, I know that I probably wasn't going to be playing the Metagross team to the level that the other Metagross players that have been playing the entire year were going to be playing it. So, I think there is a lot of truth to what you said, that some people are just going to play the teams that they think that they personally can win with the best. I know that I went into NAIC with a very standardish core team with like Landers, Cortana, Tapu Fini, but I had the Latias and I had Staka to deal with very specific opposing archetypes, and that's a team that I thought that I could do very, very well with, and I was able to day 2 not only that tournament but also was able to cut the open with it. So like, I think there's a lot of comfort when it comes to a team, and even just like developing over the years. You only want to keep working with a team if you are very comfortable and confident
Right.
with a team. And if you actually believe in it, it doesn't really matter what other people think are good and what other people say works, as long as you know that it has matchups across the field and you know that you can play the team to beat the matchups that it needs to beat.
Yeah. No, I think what you just said about other people's opinions, I think it's good to seek out other people's opinions when you're like building and picking a team, but at the end of the day, you're the one that's using it, and you're the one that has to be happy with the choice. And so, I definitely agree with that. Like you have to like it. You have to know it's a good call, and whether someone else agrees with you or not is kind of inconsequential at the end of the day.
I think something that's also interesting is not only like with the team choices themselves, but two different people can play the same team very, very differently from one another.
Oh, we do that all the time.
Oh, absolutely. I think
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of why in 2017 we really didn't see anybody else do too well with Ducks.
Uh-huh.
I ran that team from the very first internet, the first event of the format, and despite having consistent cuts with it throughout the entire year, pretty much nobody else was able to see success with it until like I think Sean Bannon was the next
Uh-huh.
finish at NAIC almost 9 months later, and then I think Thomas Platter won a regional with it after Worlds. Like
Yeah.
that's the only other two finishes the entire format, and I know a lot of that has to do with probably the ways that I play the team. I know that a lot of people didn't agree with how I used my Z move. I like to Z move a lot on turn one with that team just because of the amount of pressure that it gives and the kind of plays that you force your opponent into by doing it on turn one. And it's just something that was really like difficult for people to like wrap their heads around, that despite my opponent being able to do things like either switch out into a resisted hit or protect on it and just take damage through protect. A lot of time those situations were actually good for the Ducks player, from what I saw, because of either chip damage that you got through protect, being able to set up knockouts for things like Thunder or Hydro Pump, or things like if you're targeting something that you don't want on the field with a Z move, and the Z move forces that Pokemon to switch off the field, and now you don't have to deal with that at the time being. You can kind of readjust to play with what's on the field, and then worry about the threat that you're targeting them with the Z move later on in the game. I think that those are like two concepts that were really, really hard for people to grasp, specifically with playing the Ducks team. So there's a lot of different things to go into, whether an archetype can make it as far as a big player base team, as opposed to people doing well with a team that they think is good on their own.
I think my favorite story you always told me about that team is like, whenever you had Golduck in against Coco, you would just always Z-move it.
Always.
And, yeah, like every single time. And if they didn't protect, great, it got knocked out. If they did, it got put in Scald range. And so I think like that's something really important that I think a lot of people probably just like didn't realize about like how you played it, or like how that team could be played, is that even if you whiff your Z-move into protects, a lot of times it's still like an objectively good thing for that to happen, depending on like the scenario. And so I think just the mastery you had over like the different win cons that team had, other than just like throw water moves at everything, I think is definitely part of the reason why like you and very few other people had success with that team.
Right, and Tommy, you mentioned, and I guess Jake even just mentioned it too, that Duck specifically was a team that wasn't really so much picked up by the rest of the format, and I think you could even say that at least your variant of the Unix spam team has been largely abandoned by the community as well, with the exception of a few. It pops up here and there. What do you think it is specifically about? Like, is it these two teams? Is it like a perception of hyper offense as the community that leads why don't people pick these teams up more and play them, given that you've established so much success with them?
I'd argue that hyper offense is like a variant of team that's a lot harder for people to play, mostly because it's a lot easier to lose your footing and fall behind really, really quickly. It's very punishing if you're able to just slip up at any moment. So playing with bulk stuff like Metagross and Feeny and Landers like gives you options if you don't have like these very very high outcome turns where it's like if you make like a very basic just get myself into a good position play with a team like with a Metagross team in 2018, like you'd have more options from there to kind of just play the game. Whereas with something like Psy Spam in this format, if you're not capitalizing on every single turn that you have, a lot of times things can get out of control really really quickly. The only like defensive backbone this team actually has is just sporing things with Smeargle and being able to capitalize on the fact that you can spore because the opposing Tapu Finis are forced in by Smeargle being on the field, so then Ultra Necrozma being on the field, so then Smeargle's able to spore things as the Lele switches in, and you're able to buy turns that way. But without Smeargle there, things start falling apart very, very quickly because if your opponent gets one read right and they're able to say protect an Icy Wind or get Incineroar in a good spot, the wheels kind of come off really, really quickly.
I think that's an interesting part about Hyper Offense too, is that obviously its win cons are much frailer, but once you get to them, I think they're much more definitive. Whereas something like a Metagross team in 2018, it's much more forgiving. Like you said, it's harder to like completely blow a game in one turn, but also like when you get into a good position, it's harder to close out games. It's like when you have all this offense, if you're in a spot where your opponent just like no longer has switches, you just win. Like assuming you hit attacks that you need to and blah blah blah. Like there's much fewer ways out of bad positions when you're playing against Psy Spam as well, or Hyper Offense in general. So I think like knowing how to get to those spots and how not to blow them is a super important part of it.
Assuming you hit the attacks you need to was a mean thing to say, Jake.
Am I missing something here?
Tommy, you're not going to speak up on this one. All right, never mind. We won't talk about Precipice Blades today. No, it's fine. We'll glaze over it.
That was rude. Okay,
Yeah,
now
Jake,
I remember it.
Wait, which incident are we talking about?
Me versus Chuppa at Madison, where I missed like every Blades I clicked in the set.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Too soon.
See, like, I'm generally someone that doesn't run a lot of moves that miss. So when I get to a situation like that, I kind of know what I'm signing up for. Like,
yeah.
So, something that I'll boast about all the time
on.
is that 17 team, the Ducks team, had no moves that missed if you don't count Thunder outside of Rain, Hurricane outside of Rain, and Hydro Vortex, which was all like most of the time only used as a Z move, where you usually just click Scald if you wanted to click a water move that wasn't a Z move, and you'd really only click the other like the inaccurate options of those moves in like dire situations or to like close out a game early if you saw an opening. Like, so when you run a team like, I think it's kind of something you have to do at points in restricted formats just because of the primals. Like a lot of the better moves on the primals happen to be inaccurate moves. So you have to like know what you're signing up for and know that like setting yourself up for potentially missing Blades is a part of like how you play those teams, and it's a big reason why I don't like to play teams with moves that miss, but sometimes I do think it's like optimal.
So when you are in a format like, or a season like this one for you, or like 2017, where to an extent you've kind of accepted that this is going to be your team going through most of the format, what kind of thought or strategies or building goes into the fact that you're not necessarily continuously building a new team, but more or less just kind of like adapting one over the course of what could be any number of metagame shifts?
So the main thing that you're doing is every time a new team pops up in the metagame, you want to like run through your matchup with it and see what you have to do to potentially beat the team that pops up. Something that's generally annoying about having a team that's kind of existed for a long time is that people generally have more matchup experience playing against your team than they would against like a new team that's kind of just popped up. Like if you're playing something like Ultra Necrozma, despite not having like a huge metagame share, like if a new archetype or even just like weird changes to an archetype, like Wolf's team just had the Celesteela made Celesteela like rise in usage really quickly. Not something that really matters too much for like the Ultra Necrozma team, but in general, like weird metagame shifts because of a small little Pokemon often can really change like how a matchup works. I think the biggest one this year for the Ultra Necrozma team was that version of Rayogre that had Whimsicott on it and the Ferium Z Coco that I think Raghav had been piloting for like a large portion of the format. That team more than any other was a big reason on why I don't think Psyspam kind of like took off right after the regional win, because that team in particular kind of just takes one of your better matchups, which was Rayogre, and kind of flips it on its head because of the fact that Fairy Z Tapu Koko puts on so much pressure on Ultra Necrozma and Mence, because both of those Pokemon are huge parts of the matchup, because you want to go into Tailwind against opposing Tailwind users. It's generally why Mence is on the team. And otherwise, Ultra Necrozma kind of just has to power its way through Kyogre and Rayquaza. But when they have, Whimsicott, which can set up Tailwind that, you can't stop it from going up. It's going to go up. You just kind of have to match it. And then the Coco has free reign to throw Fairy Z into whatever slot it wants to. The only way around that is having, Smeargle, which can't Spore if there's a Coco on the field. So you just generally have to kind of look at every team that pops up and say, well, how am I beating this matchup? How am I going to adjust? And whether it's something that you have to do in your play style, or whether it's something you have to do from the team builder and, make changes to your team and maybe, tinker around with some moves, tinker around with some EVs, or even sometimes just change an entire slot.
So at a certain point, when you see these teams pop up that might, threaten this established team that you've been using, how bad would it have to get to make you ditch that team entirely? Like you just said, a good example would be like Raghav Rayogre against your Psyspam stuff. Did that team like make you reconsider using Psyspam altogether? Did you manage to like work out a matchup, or are there scenarios where you would just say, okay, I need to find something else because this is becoming very close to unplayable?
I think it's more of a metagame share of collective teams rather than a specific archetype. Mm-hmm. You mostly care about how the team matches up against a wide variety of teams. And if you're going into a tournament and saying that, I have a reasonable portion of teams in the metagame that I think are, very, very hard for me to defeat, something like, say 30% of the metagame is just teams that are really, really hard for me to beat. Well, that's accounting for like, maybe 2 Swiss rounds, and then if you take those 2 Swiss rounds and then say chalk one up to bad luck, because you generally have to do that when you're thinking about like a tournament run.
Uh-huh.
Then it's like kind of like, okay, maybe I have to start looking at other things, because I need to make sure that I'm playing against matchups that I can at least have a neutral matchup. A neutral, somewhere like a 40-60 is what I'll consider a playable matchup to me. Even if the matchup's like in my opponent's favor, as long as I have tools that I can play out of every matchup, I'm kind of content with where the team is. It's when it becomes, unlikely for me to win matchups, and there's enough matchups across the board that I feel that way about. That's when I start to reconsider team choices.
So in the context of this season, right now in the format, and of course you don't have to reveal anything that you don't want to, are you feeling good about the state of Psyspam or no? And on that note, at this point in the format right now, are you feeling good about the state of Ducks or no?
Groudon's big. Goldenfish, Cloud9. This is fine.
Ducks reimagined.
But Psyspam, so I think that Psyspam is at a similar spot to what it was before Nationals, which is I think it has good matchups across the board, but I think that the matchups are not as positive as what I once would have thought, and because of that, I look for things that are more positive across more matchup. Like right now, I think that Psy Spam has a lot of neutral matchups across the board, and not a lot that are like terribly great. Like, if X-Ray were to pop back up again, that was the big thing that I was targeting in Madison or in Hartford. Was X-Ray just won Berlin, and Psy Spam has a really, really good matchup against X-Ray, at least based on the archetypes that we were seeing after Berlin. If something like Radon were to pop up again, that would also be something that's really good for Psy Spam. But otherwise, like the other matchup across the board, like Ray Ogre and Zerndon, because of like changes to the archetype over the last like 2 months, they've gone from like being matchups that I'd consider probably around like 55-45 or like 60-40 to probably like sub 50 now. And because there's not enough like super positive matchups across the board, I'm a little bit more concerned about it going forward.
Do you think it's patchable with team building at this point, especially because I think at the before you kind of had the first coming out party for this team, like it was a lot in flux as far as Pokemon goes, and at least from your perspective, it's kind of locked down into like a main 6 now. I know you've messed with techs here or there, but is there like anything that you think you could do to take the 6 that you've popularized and like change it to do enough to get past some of those negative matchups?
I'm not entirely certain because I think there's like a very strong core to the team that really can't be touched. The two restricteds, the Tapu Lele and the Smeargle. I'll say what I've always said about the team. I think the most important mon on the team is the Smeargle, and it will always be the Smeargle, and that's normally a slot that teams would want to, toy around with to change matchups, but because of what I've said before, it's kind of like the defensive backbone of the team that lets the team do all the other stuff that it wants to do offensively. The Smeargle lets it, kind of take a turn or two a little bit slower, put some Spore onto things, use Follow Me, use Fake Out to get attacks off of Necrozma. And because there's like 4 Pokemon that really can't change, and there's a slot that really has to beat Xerneas because of what Xerneas means to a restricted format, there's not enough wiggle room, I think, to really tackle all the archetypes unless you have a very, very good idea of what you're going to be playing during day 1 of Worlds. Like, if you knew for a fact that you're playing, like, somewhere around, like, 3 or 4 archetypes guaranteed and you're not playing anything else, then maybe you can make some small adjustments in that, like, Salamence slot, or maybe even play around with the stack slot and do something a little bit different. But I think that because the format's, like, a little bit open right now, to the point where I wouldn't be comfortable saying that there's just, like, 3-4 teams that I expect to see, and those matchups that I already said are, like, suboptimal. I don't think they can get much better than, like, 55, like 45, and that might involve sacrificing the other matchups that you're not expecting to see. So
right,
I think it's a little bit hard to do at this point in the format, but I do think that the team would, like, it definitely has the power level to make a deep run, and I definitely, if I'm not playing it, would be very, very afraid to see it because of how powerful I think that the team is. Like I said, it's a team that capitalizes on the fact that you have more initiative than your opponent. You're kind of just, you're playing the hyper offense, you're going to go first, you're going to put more pressure on their stuff right away than they can, and you kind of back them into a corner right away. And that's going to be something that's true about the archetype throughout the entirety of the format. And that's never going to change. But as far as, like, matchups go throughout the entire event, I'm less confident about that.
It's kind of interesting. So Jake asked, what would make you abandon your archetype of choice here, and it looks like we might have hit that point in the meta. So kind of an interesting conclusion to the discussion as far as archetype development might just be the end of said archetype here. And you heard it from Tommy. He's a little on the fence, so he's done a nice job of masking exactly what he's going to bring to Worlds here, despite being in a semi-public forum. So nice job, Tommy. And a lot of good discussion, some super interesting points. And I'm glad we were able to make that span a couple formats. If it had been just in Psy Spam, but getting to talk about Ducks was cool too. I know that team was a lot of fun. So to wrap up the little interview portion that we have here, Jake has compiled a very important research-based question and list for you here.
I did so much research into this question, and I have the definitive answers for each of the questions I'm about to ask you. And so Brendan doesn't know them either, so you're both going to play this game of sorts. But this is very serious. This is backed in science, and everything I'm about to say is irrefutable, so don't even bother. But I'm going to name a Pokemon, and you have to tell me whether you think it is a duck or not, and give me your reasoning.
Okay.
Okay. Number
I'm
one
ready.
is Pelipper.
Duck.
Pelican.
Brendan is correct. It is in fact a pelican. It is not a duck. Tell me you lose. I'm not even going to bother with the rest because that was the most important one.
Okay.
Okay, moving on.
You're wrong, by the way, but...
I'm not. No, I told you science. I have science on my side. Okay, the next one is Muck. Doesn't matter which one.
Not a duck, but it's a friend.
Brendan?
I think that any Pokemon that rhymes with duck must be a duck.
You are 2 for 2. That is the answer. Muck rhymes with duck, so it is
Was
a
I
duck.
seriously? That was your logic behind it?
Yes, it is.
Oh, my
Not
God,
my
okay.
logic. I'm telling you.
Just like Jake and I have not conferred about this.
No, not at all.
That's usually my logic, too. I was trying to play the field.
Okay, number 3 is Necrozma.
Oh. Duck. It's got wings and a beak.
Doesn't it have a beak? I was going to say duck for that one as well.
Sorry, the correct answer was no. Aliens cannot be classified using human taxonomic labels. Really close, guys. I think if we could apply those labels to Necrozma...
Is that true? Have we
Space duck?
attempted to classify...
Hello?
Have we
Space,
attempted to...
We can call it a space duck if you want. That's
Have we even
as close to
attempted to
duck as we
classify
can get.
aliens by human taxonomic labels?
Brendan,
Is
I
there a
don't know how many
precedent for
times I have
that?
to tell you. This is science. I know that you...
I'll settle for space duck.
I'll give you space duck. That is, it's
Okay,
not a duck,
space
but it's a
duck.
space duck. Okay, number 4 is Smeargle.
Yes, because it can transform into a duck.
Oh, that's... also, it can also metronome moves used by a duck.
Those are good. You're both correct in that it is a duck. Your reasonings are good.
Also,
Not the official
can-
reasoning, though. The official
can
reason is
learn-
because the Duck Hunt and Dog character from Smash has a duck with him, and Smeargle's a dog, and so therefore Smeargle is also a duck.
That's irrefutable logic. Can Smeargle learn chatter in
Yes.
any generation? So in Gen 5, when you can record the noise for chatter, you could feasibly make it quack, right?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. There's
Let's go with
another-
that.
Definitely a duck, Smeargle.
Okay, number 5 is Ducklet.
Duck.
Yeah, it's a duck.
No, everyone knows ducks can't be blue.
I hate you.
That's clearly not a duck, because a blue duck, hello, that would just be crazy.
Just give me a marker and a
hear-
duck and I'll prove you wrong.
I'm
You
calling
could hear
PETA.
Tommy thinking about why exactly you were going to say that wasn't a duck, and he wasn't able to figure it out in time.
Okay, last one. Last one is Porygon 2.
Yes,
Duck.
duck.
Yes,
Wait,
Porygon
no.
is officially classified as a 16-bit duck.
Wait, can
That
ducks
is-
be pink, though?
Sure.
Are we refuting the logic from the last question?
I only said ducks can't be blue. Nothing. I didn't
But
say
can
anything
they-
about pink.
Can they be pink?
Clearly, if Porygon 2 is a duck.
Oh my god. Okay. All right,
This
you lost me.
concludes our foray into science and biology. I thank you guys for embarking on this journey with me, even though clearly you don't know what you're talking about and I do. But hopefully I got to educate both you two and our audience as well.
I feel like I learned a lot here today.
The lengths I will go to to be stupid.
I think Tommy's face palming right now. His head is down.
I
at the
hope he
desk.
is. I bet he is.
The only thing I've gained from this is a lack of respect.
Like you had any in the first place.
This is fair.
It's a lateral move.
All right, so for the last piece of our, I guess, interview here with Tommy, we like to do a reverse where we play that popular Uno card here, and also do the cha-cha slide at the same time. There was too many reverse references and in too little time. But anyway, Tommy, we have asked you to prepare a question for us, so the floor is yours.
I had a really, really dumb question, and I decided not to go with it, and I decided to go with it because I couldn't think of another one. So my question for you, what is your favorite prime number?
11. That was fast. Wow. I knew that. I was ready. I didn't even have to think. It was like, oh,
I
11.
I just don't have what. Do most people have favorite prime numbers?
Well, 2 of the 3 of us in this call do, so clearly.
Is 31 a prime number? I choose that.
Yes, it is.
Okay, I choose that. 31.
My favorite number is 10, and 11 is the closest prime to 10. So that's my reasoning.
There you go. Mine is because 31 is my house number and also Mike Piazza's number.
Oh, okay.
For those keeping track, mine is 7 because it's a cool number.
Respect.
Can't argue with that.
All right, finally.
I was originally going to ask what's your favorite 4-digit prime number, but didn't feel like sitting here waiting for 5 minutes, waiting for you guys to look up 4-digit prime numbers.
I thank you for not wasting our time.
What about 2019? Is that one?
Oh, it might be. Honestly, I don't even know. No, it's not. It's not because
Nope, it's not. It can be evenly divided by 1,673 and 2019.
well, 1 in 2019.
No,
is
I
a
know.
definition.
Okay.
No,
I
like, if you
know
take
what
a
a prime
number and you add
is.
up all the different numbers and it's a multiple of 3, then the number itself is a multiple of 3.
Oh, I did know that actually. I
Yeah.
did know that.
Anyway,
You
our
can't-
last
you
little bit
can't
of
fact check
content
on
for this
whether or not I know
episode. As usual, we all have our music recommendations for the week. I'm going to start off by saying that Mr. Wives just released a new single, and Mr. Wives is one of my favorite bands, and I saw them this spring, and they performed this song at the concert before they had released it, so I knew what it was when it was coming, and I was still blown away because it's so good. The song is called Why. If you want more than one song, listen to either of their albums, Connect the Dots or Our Own House. They're amazing, and I love them.
I think they also announce a tour today, like in
They
addition to that.
did.
Because I got a notification for it for House of Blues,
Yeah, I don't think it's.
or not House of Blues, Paradise Rock.
Yeah,
live in
they're
Boston.
that's where they'll be in Boston. I don't think they've announced all their dates because there's only like 10 or 15. And I imagine their tour's gonna be longer than that. But they did announce a tour and a few dates, and so fingers crossed they come to Texas because they currently do not have Texas listed, and I'll be very sad.
So mine for this week is kind of a departure from a lot of the other stuff that I've said so far, and the artist is a DJ called, I believe it's pronounced Elephant. It's like elephant with an E on the end, and he's like a I guess like a dance pop would be the genre. I don't know exactly how dance pop dance. I don't know. Anyway, it's like DJ thing, like in the same vein as stuff like Marshmello and guys like that. And he's a little bit not quite as well known, but super good songs in my opinion. I think the album that's most well known is called Glass Mansion. Highly recommend. And Tommy, if he's still there.
Yeah, I'm still here, sadly.
Wow.
So I'm gonna detour slightly here. Like, a lot of people know that I listen to a lot of video game music, but not a lot of people realize that I listen to video game music that's not Pokemon. So what I'll say is that if you have not played Bravely Default, I recommend playing the game, or if not playing it, at least listening to the soundtrack, because it has by far one of my favorite soundtracks of all time, and that's definitely been back on my my radar again. Been listening to a lot of tracks from Bravely Default. Definitely recommend that.
I think if anyone doesn't know that you listen to a lot of video game music at this point, they're just blatantly not paying attention. But that's cool. I know very few video game soundtracks outside of Pokemon myself, so I'll definitely check that out.
Awesome. Well, Tommy, unless you have any parting words for our audience here, you've got 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. That is going to wrap it up for Soundproof this week. And again, a big thank you to Tommy for coming on to our show this week as we continue. And I'm going to replay my broken record here to bring personalized content with our guests every week. And of course, we got to talk with Tommy about 2 of the teams that he is most well known for, and a lot of the thought that goes into it, which I think was really interesting content. So again, big thank you to Tommy.
Yay.
And of course, thank you to all of you for again joining us for your first or second or third week listening to Soundproof. We enjoy bringing you this content. So again, the more that you listen to it, we're just going to keep pumping them out until, we have 0 views or everybody unfollows our Twitter or something like that.
Please don't. That was not an invitation. All right, well, again, thanks to everyone for listening. Thanks to Tommy for coming on. We'll be right back to wrap it up. Stay tuned.
All right, and thanks again for sticking along with Tommy Watch 2019, their ongoing Tommy coverage. It was great to have him on. I thought we had a lot of good conversation with him. I've been really pleased with all of our guests so far, Jake. We've had a lot of awesome guest content so far, and I think Tommy was no exception here this week.
Definitely, yeah. I think all three of our guests so far have had a lot of really good things to say. They were very good additions to our little podcast here, and so, big thanks to Tommy for coming onto this episode. Like we said, both pretty good friends with him. He's a really great guy. If you don't know him, I recommend fixing that because he's a really good person to have around. And obviously pretty good at Pokemon too.
I hope he doesn't listen to this. We don't need to inflate his ego anymore.
No, we tore him down a little bit while he was on, so
Right.
he at least deserves a little bit of edification.
He's not going to listen all the way through the end, right?
I don't know. Does
Anyway.
anyone?
Thanks to Tommy, and again, thanks to all of you for your continued support of our content here. We really appreciate every single listen that we get. We're going to continue to pump this out. And of course, coming up in 2 weeks will be our Worlds preview episode, so we'll have a lot of content for you guys for that. There's going to be some fun stuff, some serious discussion, and I think that's going to be a really cool episode for us. I've been looking forward to it since we launched the podcast.
Me too. I think that'll be a really big episode. There's just so much to talk about before Worlds, considering it's such a big tournament. So much is on the line for everyone involved, and so it'll be really fun to talk about, people we might expect to do well, teams we might expect to do well, maybe some stuff out of left field that might show up. Yeah, I don't know. There's just so much we can talk about, and it's going to be really exciting. So I highly recommend tuning in 2 weeks for that Worlds preview episode.
All right, so that will do it for us here from episode 3 of Soundproof. And again, stay tuned in 2 weeks, and really just again, thanks so much for continuing to support us. And again, 2 weeks from now, and I don't know, I guess this episode, what day is today? Wednesday?
Yep.
It's Tuesday. Today's Wednesday
Nope.
or Tuesday?
Tuesday.
Tuesday. Okay, so you'll be listening to this in about 48 hours. So again, thanks again, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Yep, be sure to follow us on Twitter at SoundproofCast for all the latest info. If you need any more info, you can tweet us, message us, either of us individually as well. It doesn't really matter. You'll get one of us either way. But thanks again for listening, and we will talk to y'all next time.
Bye.